Order, order. Good afternoon and welcome to this public session of the Procedure Committee. Since 2010, the committee has held government departments to account for their performance in responding to written parliamentary questions, or WPQs for short. These are an important tool for MPs in raising matters of public interest and dealing with much of their constituency work. Our predecessors have regularly asked ministers to come before them where departments answering performance falls below the expected level of 85% of WPQs being answered on time, so that they can explain what issues they're facing and how they plan to resolve them. This is something which we intend to continue doing in the present Parliament, and to that end we are joined today by Karin Smyth MP, the Minister of State in the Department for Health and Social Care, and Tom Riordan, the Second Permanent Secretary, to discuss that department's performance in the first 6 months of this present Parliament. Good afternoon to you both, and before we begin, please could I ask you to introduce yourselves formally for the record?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Karin Smyth. I'm Minister of State for Secondary Care at the Department of Health and Social Care.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Tom Riordan. I'm the Second Permanent Secretary at the Department of Health and Social Care.
Thank you both for coming today, and as is traditional, as Chair, I'm going to start off with the first question, which is just regarding the department's performance, because the department did manage to improve its performance during the 2023 to 24 session, but performance has dropped again during the first part of this 2024-25 session, and I just wondered if you could explain why you feel this has happened.
I can. Could I, Chair, just outline just briefly a few comments, though? That'd be
absolutely
in order. I just wanted to make it really clear to the committee that I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon. You said it's an important tool for parliamentarians. I absolutely get that. The Secretary of State absolutely gets that. We understand how important it is for all of us as MPs to respond to constituents on that. It's a really high area of concern. And very keen to outline some of the problems, some of the solutions, and that's why we wanted to make sure we had Second Permanent Secretary here to go through some of that as well. So, I mean, I'll get Tom to go through what we have put in place as a result of recognising that performance has dipped in this period. Broadly, the sheer volume that has come in post-election with the change of government has been huge. I think the department, obviously under the previous government, had that huge rise during COVID, and then had managed to get that under a bit more control. Obviously, I've seen what Minister Agar reported to the committee before. In our initial response, which came from the Secretary of State, on the record of the last government, but in the early days of your committee, we made sure that we enacted those provisions that we set out in the Secretary of State's letter. The volume has considerably risen and kept rising at that point of time. There have been some changes, but I'm not making excuses around some of that. What I thought would be helpful is if Tom went through at this point some of the things we've put in place to manage some of that. Would that be appropriate now, or do you want to?
Before we move to that, Karin, is it okay? I mean, because obviously the Department of Health and Social Care has consistently received a high level of WPQs. It's my understanding that it's had more WPQs than any other department for quite a considerable length of time. So I was just wondering, was there something that happened recently that has meant that the department's been particularly struggling? Has there been anything that you can identify as the minister in that department as to why it would have dipped recently?
What we see is every time there is something major put out by the department, and we are putting out an awful lot of change, that does result in a spike in what comes in, understandably. So that is part of what has happened despite putting in those measures at the beginning of our term in office from July. We've seen spikes around particular announcements. So, for example, the announcement around NHS England caused another huge spike, because we understand that local members of Parliament want to understand how that works. We have had a change of ministers during a period of time as well. That obviously contributed to some of that. But broadly, the volumes, despite some of the things we put in place, have continued to be almost at pandemic levels.
I'm happy to hear from Tom if in terms of the mitigation that the department's got. Would that be a good opportunity to hear that, I think?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. And as the Minister has said, the volume continues sort of unabated. We've got, I just checked for last month, we had 1,179 PQs in April. That's well over, that's over double what's happened in the last sort of each of the last 5 years. So it's definitely, it feels like it's here to stay. So we obviously had recovered performance at those higher levels, and it's dipped. And part of that has been to do with, I think, the new government coming in and us trying to get used to working together and making sure that we have the right processes in place. One example is redrafts, where that, because of the tight deadline on particularly named PQs, if you have a redraft, it's almost, you can do it in the 2 days, but it makes it incredibly difficult, especially if you're going back through to arm's length bodies as well. So what we've done is really regrouped around the things that were working, so that the capacity is there. We've got double the staff that we had previously in the team that does this. We have an early intervention system, as we've called it, for the named day PQ. So if we're reaching the deadline of when a policy team needs to have sent a draft through to private office and to the PQ team, we're in danger of not hitting that. There's a sort of early alert that goes through. We've got specific league tables, always concentrates minds in organisations, bit of competition, and that has been quite effective in working out where the pinch points are and where the problems are. That is, as the Minister said, sometimes often linked actually to, if there's been an announcement about GPs, as there was last week, then we'll tend to get quite a lot of answers into that team, questions into that team. So sometimes it's to do with that. We've got a programme of learning and development for the department, and there've been dedicated sessions. We had 700 people dialing into the most recent one, so people are clearly getting the message that this is important and that we've got to deal with it. Refreshed and more accessible internal guidance has been important, so I just had a look at that myself in preparation for coming here today, and it's quite clear, and there's been a real attempt to get that clarity of process and clarity of almost right first time into the system that maybe we haven't had at times previously. And then NHS England, who we rely on for it's probably around a quarter of our PQs, have introduced a new system as well to track and monitor particularly named day PQs. So they're the measures that were set out in the letter, and there are some additional things that we've been trying to do as well that I could go into as well if you'd like me to at some point.
I think we'll probably be coming to those in the questions, and I'm conscious that colleagues have got questions. Was this directly?
Just on the guidance that you said you reviewed
Please.
in preparation for this meeting, where does the author of that guidance sit within the organisation? Because Karin, as the Minister, you've got responsibility, as Wes outlined in his letter, to drive that forward, and obviously you're second permanent secretary.
Yeah.
So why didn't you see that document before it was approved and operational? It's felt that you've just read it now for the first time, even though it's been implemented. I don't know if that's fair.
I think it's the guidance is used by people who are dealing with the PQs every day and clearing them every day. That's the purpose of it, is aimed at the people who are drafting the PQs. And so that's the audience that I need to be concerned about. And when I obviously picked up the fact that we were underperforming, that it was important that I read this in preparation. But the person who's ultimately responsible is the permanent secretary. The person in the organisational structure is the director of strategy, who's responsible for the team who coordinates that, and he is obviously over this every day to make sure that we're doing what needs to be done.
Thank you, Chair.
Michael.
Thank you, Chair. So our predecessor committee was understandably, very sympathetic during the pandemic and the difficulties that posed to the department in terms of responding to WPQs. So, but why do you think it has taken so long since the pandemic for performance to recover to the strong levels that were seen pre-pandemic?
Shall I
Yep.
take that one? I think obviously the department was right at the heart of what happened during the pandemic, and the part of Whitehall that was probably most in the eye of the storm, and there was a massive need to make sure that everything was being done possible to deal with the virus and keep people safe, and make sure that everything that was possible to be done was being done. Parliamentary accountability remained really, really important during that period, but inevitably, I think because of the impact of what happened, possibly turnover of staff as well during a period that was very turbulent, where people like myself actually got brought in from the outside to help and others stayed through it. I think there was just a recovery that inevitably took a bit of time to get people recruited into the core team, to double the number of people, to review the processes so that we were getting the response levels that we needed. The arm's length body, the key arm's length body for us was NHS England, which was similarly the one that was right at the front line trying to deal with things as well. So I think it was just a sheer practical issue around recovery and getting back onto sort of what was normal business. I think that they're the main things that I would probably flag.
If I can add, Chair, in terms of that response post-election period, the volumes are really, really significant, and obviously policy has changed with the new government. That takes a bit of time, so the redraft issue, which I think we alluded to as well, is significant. It was certainly, and I think speak for all ministers who respond to this, our feeling that as a new administration we wanted to make sure that the answers that went back to people reflected the new priorities of the newly elected government. That takes a degree of time for policy teams within the department and NHS England to respond to that in a way. So I know that I've had a number of redrafts and had those discussions with teams to say, actually, I don't think this is good enough to go back to colleagues. And actually, the policy has changed, and that does take a bit of time to roll through. So that is part of the volume issue with such a huge new intake of Parliament, obviously, and a high level of interest in the health service, as I said in my opening comments, that people want to know, quite rightly, what is going on, as well as recognising the huge change that has happened with the new government, reflected in things like redrafts, trying to make sure we get that right, and actually giving quite fulsome answers. So I think there are some issues in there for us. One of the things I think we don't do is, as I understand it, we answer more. We haven't got the same rates of things like proportionate cost. We do answer. We answer quite fulsomely in most cases. We haven't been referring to other documents and other links in some cases. And I think that all of that is taking time, but we have to balance that fulsome of answers and volume against the important targets that Parliament has set us. And that's a very live discussion, and very keen to hear from colleagues about your views on some of that and some of the quality of those responses.
Mary?
Thanks, Chair. My questions probably being answered in terms of, I just wanted to know the steps you had taken since July, since the election, to try and improve the answers to questions. So unless there's anything else you want to add on those steps that have been taken?
I just two or three things, if I may. Yeah, no, we have looked at there are certain pinch points, and some of the resource, not just in the in the department and in the officials team, but in the way that political team looks at things. We have, we're one minister down from the original number of ministers we had. We've got a lot of parliamentary business. We have to make sure that the balance is right in terms of the special advisors looking at some of the answers, and that's been improved. With the redraft rate, we've disseminated more about ministerial preferences and some of the feedback, because I think it's a good thing that our ministers want to sign off all the PQs. That means we've got to have really good processes back, especially if there are redrafts happening. We've also tried to look at how much more information we can make available to MPs, so that they don't need to ask the question in the first place. So information that's available in the House of Commons library, we've improved around health conditions, numbers of GP and dental practices, for example, lots of information from the digital bit of the NHS that's now on a constituency basis and on a local authority basis. And that's something that we've been trying to do to deal with the sort of demand issue that's coming through. So yeah, they're probably the main things that I would mention as well, because we've tried to look more sort of laterally at why are people asking so many questions.
Okay, thank you.
Lee Dillon.
Yeah, thank you. So the Secretary of State wrote to us and talked about the team now being fully recruited, and you alluded earlier that you doubled the capacity. So do you think that you've got the right resource now in place to be able to get back to that 85% target, given, as Karin said, that it's unlikely that you're going to see this deluge drop off? Or will you look to recruit more staff?
Start on the staff we've got, and then I'll take the second bit if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, on the staff we've got, we are improving our performance. So it's on the way back. And we haven't got the sort of fully verified figures yet for our performance in the last month, for example, but it's likely to be much better than it was previously. So that's good news, and what we've been doing is making a difference. To your question, will we be able to hit the 85%? I mean, that is an incredibly stretching target for us when we have, the nearest department to us, I think, gets probably about 60 or so, 2/3 less PQs than us. Yeah, I think the team said that we answer more PQs on time than any other department. It has actual PQs, so we have a real, the volume and work involved in what we're doing is huge. It's a huge logistical exercise. I am confident that we're going to get back nearer to the target. That target that changed from 80 to 85%, I think, is always going to be, for this department, incredibly challenging to achieve. But we will be doing everything that we can to do it, and we'll keep looking at trying to improve. We've taken this really, really seriously, hence us, both wanting to be here today. We really appreciate the importance of parliamentary scrutiny. I started off my career drafting PQs when I was in the civil service. I know what it's like, and I know how hard the process is sometimes. So yeah, we'll be doing everything that we can. Our performance is definitely improving. Whether we'll be able to hit that target or not, I think I couldn't say categorically at this stage.
I mean, it's a very strange business, turning up to the department and doing this new work that some of you will be aware, and certainly when it was first brought to my attention, I was turning them round, sign them off very quickly, and some of you might know I'm a former NHS manager myself, so I kind of look at targets, and I said, well, I'm signing them off really quickly. Why is this a problem? As did Minister Kinnock, and with Minister Gwynne, and then Minister Dalton. So I do want to assure colleagues that on a personal basis, not hitting the target for Parliament matters, and we did ask that. So we drove the teams to say, well, what's going on in this process here? And all our offices, and I do want to pay tribute to actually the team. we're both working on these in the department, and our private offices who are saying, okay, we need to get through these are really important, about trying to streamline that process even before being called back before the committee, because we wanted to make sure that we understood what was happening to us. So I didn't understand why I was falling behind, given the turnaround time that thought I was hitting. So we drove it individually and then looked at it systematically, which is as Tom has said. But they are pulling out. And I'm happy to, your question about would we put more resource into this right now, given obviously we are making huge cuts to establishment financial as a result of what we have to do to fix the NHS, and would we propose to put more staff time into this right now within the department? So it's obviously something we continue to look at, but I don't think that would be the right solution at this particular point in time. We need to look at other ways to make sure we try and hit the target, and crucially make sure that colleagues get the answers they need to serve their constituents. That's the ultimate point of the target and the questions. So as Tom alluded to, making sure that information is available in a format for people that they can access. Very keen to hear from the committee or other members of Parliament about what will help their staff, what is it they're not getting. Obviously, we've got a lot, as Thomas said, a quarter or so goes to NHS England. I know that members of Parliament want information from their local systems, and we want to make sure that they have that. The change of the NHS England will take a stage out of the process because there will be part of the same team. That's going to take a while to come into play. So that is another part of the process that will improve. But all ways of thinking about how do we get the information to members of Parliament in the right way. Very, very keen to explore those.
Sorry, Chair. Could I just add one point? The name day target is the hardest one. By definition, because it's so tight, and often 2 days. You're talking about 2 days. If it's on, just to give an example, if it's on data, we have to. Basically, the deadline that the digital part of NHS England that used to be called NHS Digital will get something before 10 in the morning, and to hit our deadline, we need to get that back by 5 the same day. If there's any new element within it, it's incredibly challenging to do that in those circumstances. So it's just like I would just say that, we'll be doing everything we can to hit that target within the resources that we've got available. And as I say, performance I think is definitely going to improve. For that named day one, I think that is the most stretching one of all.
And it's quite just interesting in terms of, as members putting these in, is actually, knowing how much work and effort goes on and what the systems are. For us to be a bit more considerate as well, and just give you that bit more longer time to answer if we don't need it that urgent, really. So.
Michael again.
Thanks, Chair. So you mentioned NHS England and the changes there. I know that in his letter to us last September, the Secretary of State set out that they had introduced a new system, I think you might have mentioned this earlier, to track and monitor named day responses. How will the reabsorption of NHS England by the department affect work on WPQs, bringing those together? And what steps are you taking to minimise any disruption during that, understandably, changing process, minimise any disruption to written answers?
I think, in one sense, obviously it's very difficult, and I think we're all conscious of the difficulty for staff in an uncertain environment for that. So obviously there's the teams in NHS England. In some cases they need to go through their Parley team into all of our local systems to find out information to make sure that you get the right information back. That team, as all teams, are subject to the merger, so on. So there is inevitably some changes going on there that are difficult for the individuals. But in terms of the process, if you like, there is less of a process going out to another organisation and then sort of chasing through that. So it will all be in the one team. So it does actually streamline the process for this particular activity in time.
Yeah, and I think, so we're obviously thinking about that there'll be a new organisation as a result of the merger, and in thinking about what that organisation will do and be, obviously one of the main things that it does is we will be a Department of State, accountable to Parliament, running the systems that we run at the moment, but as a single entity rather than two separate organisations, as the Minister said. And although we are making some quite significant reductions as part of the merger, that role will be, that role will have to be a fundamental part of what we do, and it will the effect, the challenge of making those efficiencies but performing better than we are now, we think is sort of probably outweighed in a way by the clarity we're going to get of single policy teams and delivery teams being together, and a more singular messaging going out to the systems about what we need and what we want, together with that attempt to put more information through the House of Commons library with the ONS out to the general public and out to you as parliamentarians.
Thank you. James, did you want to ask a question at stage?
Yeah, I think I suspect a lot of this has been covered. I will ask it nonetheless. So, the Secretary of State's letter, most recent letter, indicated you've assumed responsibility for driving the work forward in this area. So, well volunteered. We appreciate that. And we're going to want to know really what action you were planning to take to sort of drive that forward. And obviously a lot of that you've covered, but I thought we'll ask it, and then if there's anything else you haven't covered and kind of work you want to take on.
Thank you. And look, I as I think I alluded to earlier, having been on the other side as a manager, I think I like to look at the process behind and look at the target to see what's happened, and I do think it's important. So I think my heightened interest at looking at this and meeting with the team, which I did quite early on, to have them talk to me about that then, as did Minister Kinnock and Minister Gwynne at the time, and subsequently Minister Dalton. So yes, I think I then stood up and then got volunteered, but very happy to do so, and drive a hard task on the team, but also want to be frank about what the issues are. Hence, being frank about the resource and how we manage the demand as well. So and as I have done to pay tribute to the team, because they want to do better. That's very, very clear, very impressed with the team we've got that want to do better. So that is partly about formalising that a bit more. So that is that on behalf of the whole department now as well, and to be the lead minister for that, coming here today, but also taking that back and having regular meetings and sessions with them. And I find it, and as do we all, because what it also does, and I'm sure you all do this in your own constituency teams, I certainly always have, I've valued, whether I agree with it or not, the correspondence you get into your offices. The questions that we get tell me what you don't know and what is important to you, or what you are, who you are talking to, and what you're talking to them about. It's a real indicator of what's happening in the wider system. So I'm very happy to do that. I think it does provide intelligence and where we need to be better. So that would be a regular session to keep on top of that and to see what the issues are and where they're coming up, and make sure that we work with the Permanent Secretary and the directors to make sure that the focus is still on that.
Okay, thank you.
Your issue is not correspondence as well, but obviously that is also an important part of the department's parliamentary focus.
Thank you. Lee Pitcher.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Karin and Tom. I'd like to ask you a little bit about governance. And when you come together as a departmental management board, is WPQ performance a standard agenda item that you discuss?
Yes, it is. It's discussed as part of our parliamentary business, if you like, and accountability responsibilities. I think it's fair to say that it's increased in its visibility since the dip in performance, and the league tables have been important in, I think, drawing out that sense of sort of visibility about performance and accountability across the board. Yep. So although those ExCo meetings, as they're called, are important, I would say as important, there's an email just been circulated this week where the team has set out, you know, how we're doing, particularly on named PQs. And there's an attachment that breaks down into the different teams and shows the relative performance. There's a call out of the really good stories. We've got a lot of people at 100%, which is great. You can also drill into where it's obvious that there's been a bit of a spike in interest after announcements. And I think having worked in a system like that as coming through as a sort of middle manager, when you get an email like that and you see that you're bottom of the league, you really want to do something about it. So I'd say the combination of what the Minister set out in terms of that, you know, top of the office, this is really important message, and then the follow through with the discussions in the senior team meeting about how this needs to remain a priority, but then the real work being done outside those meetings and making sure that we're on that. And after today, you know, there's nothing like a Parliamentary Select Committee to concentrate minds to make sure that we're going to get better.
So I'm going to concentrate a little bit more, Tom, if that's okay. So now you've got the visibility, and you're having those discussions on a more regular basis at Management Board, or you've always been having them, but it's there a bit more often and the discussion takes place. In terms of taking away actions, have you set yourself some internal targets around getting back to the 85% specifically? I.e. you've talked about, you know, I think you talked to Lee about the difficulty actually in achieving that 85, and named days is difficult. But in terms of saying, actually, in order to get to 85, we need to be at 84.3 by this date, and this is how we're going to do it. Does that exist, that plan?
We haven't set individual milestone targets on the way to it. I think we have, there are a couple of things that happened in terms of the dip in performance. That a change of minister will always lead to a bit of a hiatus, you know, a regrouping of how we're organising ourselves. There's been sickness, you know, you get what you tend to get, I think, in individual teams that are quite busy. If you get some, you know, sickness, absence or issues like that, then that has an effect. We're on the road to recovery now. I think whether we need to move in that direction in future, I think, you know, is something that we may want to consider ourselves. But I think the main thing is that you can be confident that we are on our way back. I think if we got close to it, we might want to try and think about that sort of thing. But we basically don't have interim milestone targets.
And I think just to add to that, as partly it's not a linear thing. It's not a constant thing. So although you can see the volumes go, as I said, we are a department, and this was put to me the other day on another subject, that is making a lot of announcements. We are wanting to keep abreast of. We recognise how important health is to the population and to all our constituents, and that does elicit then spikes. So if we can perhaps you know, the power of government link up the announcements to the response that we're expecting, that would be a bit more clever. So we might try and do that. But it's you know, it's not a linear thing, so there are spikes, and we just need to be able to respond to that. That's partly about how do you get that information back out. What is that? Is that standard information? Is that again about directing people to? We've had a lot on, for example, NHS England. We are directing people to Jim Mackey's letter and correspondence that comes out from then to assure people things like that. We can perhaps be a bit smarter about the linkage to the answer, and we'll certainly take that into the team so that people get a better response more quickly. Or do things in Parliament, again, open to suggestions and ideas. We are trying to do surgeries, drop-ins, say things to the library, newsletters that can to let people have the information they need as much as possible. I'm hoping to do something on medicines, for example, medicine shortages, supplies. That's something. The team are very keen to do an event in Parliament. So those sorts of things as well to help with the demand and the very genuine and very real questions people have got.
And I just don't want to miss the opportunity as well to say how good it is that we're praising those people who are achieving the outcomes, getting the 100% as well, because I think the positives are massively important to show other people too. So that kind of role model leadership and praising that is fantastic to hear.
Quite competitive in the ministerial team as well.
I can imagine.
Who knew a group of politicians could be competitive?
No.
David.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you both. The fact that you're inundated with PQs, we'll accept that fact. But that aside, in terms of where the delays are occurring, you've touched on this, but in the system, so where they go, I don't know what stages they go through in terms of being dealt with. Where exactly are the delays occurring? Is it in policy teams or some sort of central processing, or could you sort of walk us through the process almost of where a PQ goes when it's submitted, and have you identified where the sort of where the things that are slowing it down exist?
You want to go through the process?
Yeah. So the PQ comes in to the central team when it's tabled. The core team that deals with all of the and coordinates all the PQs, and is allocated immediately to a policy team and sent straight out for a response. There's a deadline set on that depending on whether it's a named day PQ or an ordinary written or a Lord's written that has they have different deadlines as you know. At that point, there can be a pinch point there where if a PQ is not, if it's not really clear which policy team it should go to, there is a potential challenge of it going somewhere and then a team sending it back saying this isn't us, it's someone else. There are sometimes questions that are asked that can sort of hit more than one team. I got one from today actually to try and illustrate that example where there's been a question about the steps that were taken to ensure NHS systems used by GPs and pharmacies are protected against IT outages. So that's come in today. That's a sort of classic one where, is that the GP and pharmacy team or is it the IT team? And then, so you tend to get a bit of that. They call them orphan PQs is the way the team describes them. But so that's a challenge. Then it goes out to the policy team. If the policy team needs to send it to an arm's length body, like NHS England, that then needs looping in and back. And then once the draft has been done, that goes back to the PQ team, then goes for clearance through ministerial offices and ministers and SPADs if necessary. And then it gets submitted back through the PQ team to Parliament, to the process here. If there's a redraft, then obviously at that next stage it goes right the way back through the system, and if it has to go back through an arm's length body as well, then that is what tends to add. It's almost impossible if that happens to hit a sort of 2-day deadline for an MPQ if you're talking about the sort of data issue that I mentioned before, or a sort of new piece of work. So it is the nature of the content sometimes that's relevant as well. If it's a standard, the data exists, or the policy exists, it's a straightforward reply, we just need to, put that down on paper, put the background note together, it's much easier than if there's sort of a new line that needs to be developed and agreed. Is that?
Yeah, can I just add to that?
Sure.
And I didn't mention before, I know it's obviously your purview is the Commons, but obviously my colleague Baroness Merrin in the Lords, which I didn't mention previously, obviously has sight of the Lords, what comes down from the Lords, but also where it's a Commons question on an area that she leads on, for example on life sciences, women's health, mental health, then it needs to be with her and me, as she's the policy lead in the department, and with myself. That's why you get a joint response on certain areas because of the way responsibilities are divided up. So that's another important safeguard, obviously another pinch point, if you like, to make sure that we're both happy with the response. And if one isn't, and yes, and this redraft, it took me a while to recognise that even if it was literally, and we all know this, and we respond to things, a sentence that's not right or we're not content with, then it's like, well, that doesn't need to go all the way back, does it really? That's just you almost want to sort of type it out yourself. That obviously is not the way that departments or civil servants work. But those are the sorts of things we need to iron out. And I alluded to at the start of my comments, getting department used to a new government takes a bit of time. So some of that is also part of what was part of a pinch point. But I think we've settled that now. And what Tom alluded to is ministerial preferences. We will have this words and phrases that perhaps that we don't use, that we don't feel are in our voice, that we don't sign off, that teams have got used to that a bit more now.
Can I just come back to it? Just on this issue of it going, if there's a redraft, it going, so I presume that means when it lands on the minister's desk, if you're not happy with the way it's worded or the content of it, the style of it, whatever, it needs a redraft. You were saying, Tom, it has to go right back through the process. That strikes me on the face of it as quite onerous. To be polite, when you say it goes right back through the system, do you mean literally right back to the very first point and then it's divvied up to a policy team again?
No, it'll go back to the same policy team with the need for it to be changed and the steer about how it should be changed, or whether it can be. And yeah, if there's an arm's length body element to it, I just mean that so it'll go straight back. It doesn't sort of go back through a system. It just gets allocated straight back to the team who sent it, the person who sent it, to try and redraft it in a way that then gets signed off. The other thing I would say is because of the timescales being so tight, sometimes to hit the deadline, it may get to ministers' offices with sort of 5 or 6 hours window. The point about parliamentary business is really important there. We are the department with probably the most busy parliamentary business in terms of oral PQs, in terms of the bills that are going through Parliament,
Westminster Hall.
A significant Westminster Hall. So it does often come down to sheer logistics of people being able to look at things and take the time that's needed to sign them off.
Tom.
We're talking quite a bit about the name day questions, and they perform poorly compared to the ordinary questions, and that's a trend across government. So I guess there's two questions. Firstly, I'd be interested in how do you think we can improve it? Is there a change in the system maybe that from the parliamentary side? And then also, is there best practice that's shared across departments? DEFRA might be doing something that you can nick, or vice versa. Does that happen within departments?
I think. There's the difference between an ordinary and a named is 2 days or 5 days. So, but there is a choice for members to not necessarily choose the 2 days. It could be 3 or 4. So I guess there's that element, and that question about does it really need to be that urgent, and is there something in the system whereby members are maybe frustrated already with not getting a reply by the deadline of the 5 days, so that's why they go for the 2 days. So there's maybe something about what's happening there that we could dig into with some of the clerks and some of the the conversations that we have, that's maybe worth reflecting on, because I do think, for me, having looked at this really closely, just the sheer logistics of some of that two-day one is really, really hard. Or there could be a different target, but then is it acceptable to have a different target for things that are urgent? Then on the other one, yes, there are regular meetings that happen between the different departments. I think the area that we've picked up through those discussions is the level of redraft is higher for us, and that might be to do with the amount of the sheer amount of policy that we're dealing with and the changes that are happening, and in the middle of the 10-year plan process, for example, it might be to do with that. It might be to do with some more logistical issues that we've been mentioning. But yeah, we do have regular meetings. We're always keen to pinch good ideas.
Joy.
Thank you. What challenges do you face in providing timely, accurate, and helpful answers to questions for answers by arm-length bodies? And particularly, I'm thinking of air ambulance. There's been some cross-party issues with MPs asking about air ambulance for several months since, I think, November. They still haven't had a response. That's one example, but there's several others with arm's length bodies in particular. If you can just clarify that, please.
I mean, I think I know I have answered some questions on that particular issue, but I think, as Thomas alluded to, it is the going to someone else in the time, really, and making sure we get that answer back correctly. And some of them are, obviously, we've got a lot of arm's length bodies, and it's just England being the largest. And then that they'll go out to local systems if it's particularly a local question, which is what most members of Parliament want to know about. So there's a two-stage process there. And then others are quite technical, if they're on things from the MHRA, for example, one of my areas, or a lot of the prevention public health ones that Minister Dalton will be answering. Some of those might require links with other bodies on the ground. So I think it's a part of a time and number of steps that are in the process. Partly adding to Tom's point about the name day, it took me a number of years before, when I was an MP, I didn't know this for years, it's display my own ignorance, that there wasn't a different criteria for name day and ordinary questions, that there is no difference, and it's just purely members decide on the timing rather than it requires any kind of urgency or criteria, and I didn't know that for years. But that 2 days to go out to another body, particularly on something that's quite technical, is genuinely very tight, and then get it back and then make sure the minister's happy with it is a big challenge. Tom, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it is all about the nature of the arm's length body and the question that's been asked as well. So if something is if it's a regular answer that we usually need to get from our NHS England colleagues, then obviously it's that we have an SLA already set up. We've got ways of working between the different teams. It's more straightforward than one, say, where we needed to ask, every ICB, every one of the 42 ICBs have the integrated care boards, whether they've done a certain thing or not, and then get that answer back get that information back in a short period of time. And then sometimes it will need departmental bodies that we need to talk to, organisations that we need to talk to, local authorities in some cases, air ambulance, charities. So it might be that there's been some challenges with getting the responses from, organisations that are not as geared up usually for us to be able to have a relationship where we can get the information quickly.
It might be useful, I'd be sympathetic to this, of just saying, even just corresponding with MPs, just saying, well, I'm trying, I'm getting, I'm in the process, because this air ambulancing has been since November, and it's a bunch of MPs, and it could just be maybe the letter got lost, or there's just wait, but I think it'd be great to just have even something. I know it's hard, because you don't want to say, I don't know the answer yet, but it's just, I think that sort of void of information is quite challenging for MPs, so I'll just... But I know I understand the arm's length bodies.
I'm very happy to take that. I know I have answered questions and or correspondence, but absolutely take if people are not feeling there's something that we know there's, your purview is not correspondence. We know there are some backlogs of things have not come out properly. We are conscious of that as MPs, because obviously we talk to colleagues as we're here. So if there are specifics that you want to make sure that I'm aware of, I'll make sure that we pick that up.
Boss.
Thank you. The Secretary of State told us that a significant proportion of WPQs are producing answers where the information is already in the public domain. I just wondered what percentage of the written answers are in the public domain, and also does this indicate a problem with accessibility of information published by the department?
I stand to be corrected, but I don't think we know the answer to your first point, because I'm not sure we've done that, but let me come back to you if that's okay on that as a precaution. To your second point, I think it's a good challenge, I think one of some of the questions, and they're all public, so everyone can see what the questions have been asked. And as I said earlier, it does indicate what people don't know. Now, that is then either accept that sometimes it's about directing. This is in this place, or so nobody can know everything. But your point about, well, is it opaque? Do people not understand or know what's happening in their local systems? And are they asking questions that really, I do believe in many cases, they should be able to ask of their local systems? I think that's a fair challenge. I hope that one of the things that we can do better as a result of perhaps coming together as one team, which was what the Secretary of State has tried to make sure happens with NHS England and the department since we came into office, but now as that is more formal, is to recognise that democratic oversight also happens locally. And I know that is variable. So that's both information that goes out locally, but also absolutely information from the department. And if there are ways in which the department can produce information or have it here in the House of Commons library or on websites, I mean, then we're very open to hearing those ideas and suggestions. I mean, the NHS England website, maybe partly because I came from the system, I know there's a lot of information there. There is an awful lot of information produced by NHS England that is available. Sometimes that might not be in the form that members of Parliament or the public can access. So again, open to how we make that happen. It's a huge part of our country's expenditure and taxpayers' money. We want to make sure that people know what's going on.
And is that more about sort of improving communications with members, particularly if the data is about their constituency? So I just wonder if that's something that you can be more proactive in actually communicating with members, and also, as you've mentioned, signposting where they can find that information. So that would be incredibly helpful if that's something you can take.
Sure. Yeah, we've started sending. One of the additional things we've done is sending out regular bulletins to MPs, highlighting the data sources that we've made sure are available, and that can be broken down by constituency and by I think it's upper tier local authority area, probably lower tier as well. Having dealt with MPs officers a lot in my career, I wonder whether there's a way that because I know that you won't be able to read every single email that comes in straight away, whether there's a way that we can highlight this to the people in your offices, the people who are doing the sort of casework and research sometimes, who maybe we could flag in a less, sometimes corporate bulletins come round and it's not something that's necessarily going to be read, where if we personalise it a little bit more, it might manage to flag it in a more effective way. So I think that's definitely an area that we're really keen to do more on and make sure that everybody's aware of where, what information's available there, and the fact that it is constituency based, which I know is the thing that's most useful.
And just to add to that, that's what in the Secretary of State's April letter is very keen, alluding to that, and to work with the committee and Parliament about how best to do that. Absolutely. So very open to suggestions from the committee afterwards, or whatever. Very open to discussing that.
Okay. As the Minister knows, I ask quite a lot of questions about the vaccine damage payment scheme. And a lot of those questions are asking for information which could be supplied, say, on a monthly basis, because we're talking about statistics, how many claims have been made, how many have been dealt with, how many have been appealed, etc., etc. And just on that scheme, as an example in this discussion, would it not be possible for you to provide a regular monthly update on the vaccine damage payment scheme, because that would certainly reduce the number of FOI requests, which I know come from some of the claimant groups, and the number of PQs that I put in on that. So that's one question. The other question is, what I don't really understand, because I was a minister a very long time ago, but I had to deal with all the questions that came in on what was then known as the community charge, and other people described as the poll tax. And you can probably imagine that there were a very large number of such questions. And what used to happen was that by the time the question reached my desk, there would be a background brief to it, there would be a draft, and if I wanted to change the draft, my private secretary and I would work together to change the draft, and that would be that. It wouldn't be having to go back on an iterative basis. And I just wonder how often you as a minister will actually make a change to the draft yourself and ensure that draft is what stands. Because if you've been given the right briefing, it may well be an issue of style or wanting to be more open, but I don't understand why when the minister has changed the draft, it has to go back down the line. And if it has to go back down the line, why can't it just be on the basis of a phone call?
Shall I take that last bit first? So I think, I mean, you're absolutely right to point out, your experience and how that is. So it's happening less, I think, as one, hopefully, after 9 months in the job, gets a bit better and a bit, and people get more used to both my own style and the issues and the change of policy and so on. So there should be less of that. We are, and as I've said a number of times, we are though changing a lot of policy. We are announcing change all the time, and so it's not levelled out yet, and I don't expect that to level out anytime soon. We will be as well as continue with the changes to NHS England, the department. We've got the 10-year plan, we've got a long-term workforce plan, we've got a lot of issues around the new hospital programme. So I don't expect the level of interest or the level of change to slow down anytime soon. So we're not dealing in a static period, and I welcome the challenge. As new issues come up, we do have to get that into the system partly. Your point about standardising processes and getting more information out so that we don't elicit these, I think having stronger political oversight in the department, I think that's a challenge to me about that, and to be very clear about what can be standardised, what can be put out more frequently, so that we don't have repeat questions. I certainly go back to the team and say, I've answered this question, it's public information, why is this coming back into ways? I don't have the pleasure of oversight to your questions, Mr. Chope, because it goes to another colleague, so I can't answer specifically, but I don't know if you want to say anything about that one.
I mean, we can take that away, and I don't know that...
To get something in writing, if that would be good for accuracy.
I don't know the detail of the scheme to know whether it's possible to do that, but we can certainly take that away. I mean, there are occasions where the Minister will just change something and then it doesn't need to go back through the line, but it sometimes will be, the steer is that it needs to be changed in a more fundamental way. So I think the way you describe it, I think does happen. It just doesn't happen all the time. I think I might have been one of the ones sending you the PQs at that time as well.
Revenge always comes in the end, doesn't it? I've got a question from Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for your contributions. My question, and I heard what you've said about obviously teams, you've got a new staff team, they're getting to know your style, right, and that all takes time to develop, and that's been helpful and things are improving, you can see that. And also you said there about better communications to new MPs so that we are better equipped to deal with some of those questions. And I also heard the point you said about budgets, and obviously would having more staff fix that problem? Would that be something you looked at? And I'm quite clear about your response to that. So taking that all into context, to continue the improvements and for the sustainability, would there be things that were sort of budget neutral that you think would help with that sustainability piece and improvement?
I mean, I do think the merger is going to help. The fewer links in the chain you can have, the better, the more efficient it is, the quicker you can be in terms of turning things round. And I think without a doubt that will, I think, reduce the numbers of problems that we might come across. So I definitely think that is something that will make a difference. I think the extra monitoring that we're putting in place now with the more transparent sort of league table approach within the organisation is allowing us to see where it's just an issue that's a spike that's happening, or something where it is more consistently underperforming, and where we can deal with those issues in a way that, you know, doesn't actually need it. Usually, sometimes it can be about resources and, you know, sickness, absence, but it might be to do with something different, and I think that's something that we're definitely doing to try and improve things, and I do think that's making a difference. And yeah, technology potentially could be, you know, is this an area, I know we've been asked before about is this an area where AI could make a difference? I'm not sure you'd want AI answering all your questions as parliamentarians, but I think, you know, that there is some of the background data gathering that we do. I think that is a possibility further down the line, that there are pieces of work going on across government looking at how we can utilise, you know, and corral data better and more quickly and less human intensive ways to do that.
Okay. Joy.
Thank you. Just how do we ensure that efforts to improve the timeliness of responses do not lead to lower quality answers? And I'm thinking of sort of, especially in public health questions, where I've seen some that have, I think, genuine public health inquiries about tuberculosis vaccines in children, demographic details on those, measles outbreaks, and there's been very sort of rudimentary responses, which I can understand because data is recorded differently through all the NHS trusts, and I understand what a nightmare that can be. But sometimes there is questions about public health outbreaks of why they're happening, and just sometimes more information is more reassuring than less information for MPs sometimes. And I know that's hard to I don't know how we circumvent that, but it's becoming more and more of a concern, where I think some of the questions that MPs are asking are genuine concerns of why is there a spike in this public health issue in my patch, but then they're getting very rudimentary sort of short blanket responses that don't actually answer anything. So just flagging that, and would love to hear your thoughts on that moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, this takes me right back to the pandemic.
Yeah, that's what I was...
Yeah,
and it feels similar.
Yeah, the relationship that we built during that period with a lot of parliamentarians and the Directors of Public Health directly, I think was really effective in a lot of parts of the country. And where we ran into problems, it was often to do with the lack of connection. And I think the Minister mentioned before, where we can build good local relationships between yourselves and your local trusts, but also the Directors of Public Health who sit in the local authorities. You know, that's, to me, is the best thing we can do, because then you don't need to come back round this route to get the information. That is, I think, yeah, something that maybe has abated a little bit, that relationship, and something that we could think about how we can do more on. I'm sure the ADPH, Association of Directors of Public Health, would be keen to think about how we can improve that and make sure that where there are concerns we can you know, deal with them without you having to feel the need to go through Parliament to do that.
If I can add, I think, again, it's an example, it's a good example, and I certainly, when we look at oversight, be conscious of that, because I don't see those directly, because it's not my area. It's about where the gap is, as Tom says, where the gap is, and where, you know, people need to absolutely have that information that isn't available somewhere else, so we don't lose that in the huge mass of other questions that we have, and we're sort of just getting through them, if you like. And I think Tom talked earlier about the logistics. I mean, literally, we sign them off. So I might look at my box at 7 o'clock on a Monday evening, and there's hardly anything in there, and I go back and look at it at 9 o'clock, and it's got 20 that have come through from the team in that intervening period that are shut off by the end of the session. And so, now, if you don't happen to look at your box at 9 o'clock, or you're sitting, you know, taking the debate or whatever, then you don't get to it. Whereas that's what we mean by the logistics. Now, we want to make sure that we catch those, and we absolutely, that's what it's for, isn't it? It's for the providing information that's probably not in the public domain, that is of interest to us all as members of Parliament to do our job, not just things that are available, and separating out those two things so we get quality of answers back to you as quickly as possible, I think is the goal we'd all seek to do.
And children and public health particularly, because I think that wasn't a focus during COVID, but that's where a lot of the diseases that can be very quickly spread in, just to have a heads up on that one. So
yeah, I think that's right. I think there will be others though that come out. So we all have our pets, don't we? Absolutely, that's one of the joys of Parliament. So there will be others that come out that are new, that perhaps the information isn't in the public domain, that isn't as clear. And it is right that members of Parliament have access to that, as opposed, whereas perhaps you can find the other information somewhere else, which means we'll get through the whole thing much more quickly. That's what we're aiming to try and we've got the target. We absolutely recognise that, but the goal of that target, isn't it, is to help you all do your job better on behalf of constituents. That's what we want, and access to information that perhaps should be in the public domain, that we'd want to be, that helps you do your job. We shouldn't lose sight of the objective here as well as the target.
Thank you so much for thoroughly covering off so much information there, and we're reassured as a committee to hear that apparently we're on the road to recovery, which hearing from any health professional is always reassuring. But can I just quickly ask, when is it that you expect the written parliamentary questions to be hitting the 85% target again in terms of timescale?
Is this the ordinary PQs or
maybe
as well?
if we separate them out, because that because of what you've explained today, probably is useful to separate them. In terms of ordinary questions, when would you hope to be hitting 85% by?
I hesitate to give a date, which sounds like I'm obfuscating, but I'm really genuinely not. I think I'd be really hopeful that we are back on a trajectory by the summer, so that we can be confident that we're on the right path, and we're in a space where you can be happy as a committee that you don't need to be calling us to see you, and that you might even be commending us again as you were before, that we'd managed to improve performance. I do think that target is incredibly hard for this department to hit,
given the volume.
Given the volumes that we've got.
We're looking at each other, and I think that's very genuinely, Chair. We're absolutely aiming for that target. We are writ large against that, and I'll be looking at all of those areas and the areas that I don't know to absolutely get through the process. If the volume remains the same, and within some of the things we're putting in place, that does remain a real challenge. So I don't want to commit and then come back and say, why didn't you achieve? I want to be realistic about this. You've had an earlier question about what's the milestones towards that, and I think that's a good challenge, that we are clearer perhaps with you about the match of the, in managerial speak, the match of the volume to the resource that's there for it. To make sure that is as efficient as possible. I've said there's going to be spikes, there are more announcements. Challenge on us is, to Mr Chairman's point, is the information out there so that members of Parliament know and can get information from other sources. Your suggestions on that, your help with that are really, really welcome. And so that we get to, as to Ms Morris's point, we get to the real issues about things that members of Parliament cannot access in any other forum. That will help us with the volume question, and I think until we've got a better sight of that, if this volume, and as members of Parliament, the new Parliament also, it's very new for everybody, isn't it? So let's say we want to keep aiming for a better position by the end of the summer. Perhaps we should write to you about that. Would that help?
I was going to ask, actually, Minister, if we would be able to have something from the department, perhaps ahead of the summer recess, to outline what progress is being made and how improvements are bedding in. That would be very helpful. Could we get that commitment?
Yeah. We'll get to you by recess with, as a result of today, any other suggestions that you wish to make, any other observations, very happy to receive those. and any other questions we haven't answered, and make sure that we match that volume to supply issue, and take on board some of those other suggestions. Absolutely.
Thank you. And the committee will continue to be looking at written parliamentary questions as an ongoing project. So hopefully we will be sending a letter praising you for the progress made. But if there are any issues that that has not been covered off that you want to, we're very happy always to hear from the department in writing throughout the year. So I'd like to thank both our witnesses for their time today. They've been very generous. And that concludes today's evidence session. Order.